record. When a tanker would unload, I would route the product into the appropriate tank. I also would load the tank trucks with heating oil. At the time, oil was the main heat for homes. When we got married, we borrowed Frank's car to go on a honeymoon. We went south and we stopped at Cottage Grove to see the relatives. I bought Kay a $5 wedding band. Don't laugh, gold was $35 an ounce, not $1,800 like it is now. We got a government-subsidized apartment in the new Yesler Apartments on the Yesler Way. While there, Diane was born. I was having chronic colds and had to take time off constantly because of being sick. Finally, the boss suggested I should get my tonsils out. I was also smoking cigarettes. I took his advice and immediately seemed to get better, even though I continued to smoke. Two events happened in December 1941 of importance to our family. Diane was born December 2nd, and Japan attacked Pearl Harbor December 7th. Because Diane was born before the attack, I was exempt from the draft. I continued at UNL Company until May 1944, when I wrote a letter to the draft board and told them to draft me. I said nothing about this to Kay. I did not want to be left out of the war. The draft board immediately sent me the letter, and I went into the Army. Fortunately, I was sent to Europe and not the Pacific. I don't think the Pacific would have been to my liking. After Camp Roberts, I was sent to advanced radio training at Fort Sill. During my training at Fort Sill, I was involved in an automobile accident. I was riding in the back seat of a Jeep, and another one didn't stop for the stop sign, or maybe we didn't stop. In any case, we collided. I was thrown forward, and I think I hit the windshield and suffered a cut over my eye. The next night, I began to feel sick. About midnight, I walked to the aid station and told them I was sick. They didn't see any blood, so decided to wait until morning and see if I would get better. I was not better, so about 6 they got me in an ambulance and took me to the hospital. All the time I was shivering uncontrollably in the front seat. We got to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was the wrong one, so we had to go to another one, which was about the last thing I remembered, for 3 days. I woke up 3 days later and began the recovery process. During the time I was in the coma, my sister visited me from Denver on her way to her boyfriend in Detroit, of which I knew nothing about. After a couple weeks of recovery training and getting back into shape, the Army gave me leave and I went home to Kay and Diane before going to Fort Meade, Maryland for assignment overseas. When I started out, I thought I could do better than going by train by hitching rides on military planes going east. That was permitted if the plane had the space. I was not the first to think of that, and they all had more rank than I had, which would be anyone, as I was just a private. But I went down to the Boeing field and did manage to get a ride to Spokane, where my luck ran out. After spending some useless time at the Spokane airport, constantly being bumped, I gave up and went to the train station for my trip to Fort Meade. On the one weekend I was at Fort Meade, I and another GI decided to go to New York and see the sights. So we went to New York, but I don't remember what we saw. I do remember it was in the Bronx or Brooklyn, don't know which. A couple of girls made the comment about paddle feet, referring to us, which hurt our feelings, so we went back to Fort Meade. As you know, the Army tells you nothing, but one night we ordered to put our things together and get on the train, and we arrived at New York about 1 in the morning. We immediately went on board 2 bunks on the promenade deck observation lounge of the Queen Elizabeth. At 6 they cast off and we headed out to sea. I had been so wound up I was still awake and on deck to see the Statue of Liberty when we went by. You don't go wandering all around a troop ship like the Queen Elizabeth with 16,000 other guys, but the observation deck was just a few feet away, and it was my deck, and I could go out on that. Some of the men had been on board for 3 days while the ship was being loaded. The way a troop ship like the Queen Elizabeth is loaded is the last on is the first off. So I would be one of the first off at Glasgow, where it was safe to harbor. The Queen Elizabeth sailed alone to take advantage of its speed to escape submarines. It took longer than the normal trip because we went so far south of the normal routes. Some of the memorable events of the trip that I can remember was that we got 2 meals a day. I don't remember what the second one was, but breakfast was scrambled eggs and orange marmalade. For years after the war, I would not eat marmalade. I still don't buy it. Fortunately, no one else does either. Another impression was a number of crap and carb gain going on the ship. You could hardly walk down the companionways. But it was there I learned real fast I could not win at gambling. Even at Reno or Las Vegas, I don't do much gambling. I like to watch the ocean. Fortunately, I've never been seasick then or at any time since the war. There was a little newspaper published on board, and I managed to keep a copy, now yellow and tattered. I'll look it up and post it. At Glasgow, Scotland, the ship had too much draft to dock, so we had to be unloaded by lighter. We got off on one of the first and went immediately from the dock to the waiting train. While waiting for the train to be loaded, the Scottish girls were doing their best to give us coffee for our trip. One of the girls, while hurrying, fell and spilled her pot of coffee, which made us feel real bad because she was trying so hard. I don't really know why that made such an impression, but I remember it to this day. As soon as the train was loaded, they pulled the window blinds and we headed for Southampton. We didn't see the light of day until we arrived there, I guess the next day. We went through London and didn't even know it. We immediately loaded on a Polish transport. I forget what time of day we left port and headed for Le Havre. I remember, though, at Southampton, it was, the whole harbor was demolished. I really don't know about the town. We immediately disembarked and marched through Le Havre to the military camps. As we marched through town, the women would watch from the upper windows of the buildings which were still standing. Some of the guys would throw gum or cigarettes to them, which they accepted without any sign of thanks.